But I find in general, when you're dealing with that issue, since you're estrogen, we live in that kind of a world that just promotes estrogen dominance. So I
Right.
find a lot of times with fertility,
Yeah.
it's easier to use the natural methods to deal with the estrogen, but progesterone is just kind of harder to get up there. And so that's why, like, the first time I was able to do it, but the second time I needed that bioidentical hormone replacement therapy.
Yeah.
Welcome to MyMD Unscripted, where healthcare gets personal and the script gets tossed. I'm Dr. Clint Carter, ER doctor turned direct primary care freedom fighter, on a mission to challenge how our healthcare system treats patients in America. In every episode, my expert guests and I dive into real conversations about what's broken and how we can fix it by making healthcare about people, not just managing disease. It's time to rethink what healthcare should be and how we can make it better together. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, and welcome back to the MyMD Unscripted podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Clint Carter, and I'm excited to have Dr. Serena Russum with us today. Dr. Serena is a naturopathic doc, an award-winning speaker, a functional medicine doc who specializes in women's health from puberty to menopause, extensive training in bioidentical hormone replacement, which we love at MyMD Select, as well as pelvic floor therapy. And she's passionate about helping women thrive at every stage of life, thriving being one of our mission and our core values. I love it. So before we get started here, Dr. Serena, I'll let you introduce yourself further. But the question that I want to start with, so many women struggling with hormones, skin issues, fatigue, and they're told it's just part of getting older. Why do you believe that the body is designed to heal, and where should we really start? So I know that's kind of a loaded question. Why don't you tell us how we got here and give us a little bit more introduction about you?
Well, a little bit more about me. You kind of got all the professional aspect, but I became passionate about hormones and treating hormones because I myself have struggled with hormones.
Yeah.
Basically, since I hit puberty, which was delayed because I grew up a competitive figure skater who, as most female athletes, I was lean, muscular, but, surprise, surprise, dealing with an eating disorder. And that screwed up my hormones so bad.
Yes.
Yeah. So from the beginning, I was put on birth control, and I was basically, some went well, some didn't with the side effects. Some were great, but none of them regulated my cycle. And every time I went off, I ended up with like horrible, heavy, like near debilitating cycles that were irregular. But when they happened, they were awful.
Yeah.
And still, the only option I was ever given was birth control. And I even had one doctor tell me I'd probably never be able to have children of my own.
Gosh.
So yeah, it started off rough.
That's a heavy thing to say to a teenage, early 20 young woman, for sure.
Yeah, it's not the best bedside manner, I'd say, looking back on it now. But, at the time I was like, okay, well, let's just like one opinion. We'll see when I get older. And started to get older, got married, started trying, had multiple miscarriages. And now I was like, oh my gosh, it might be true.
No.
And it wasn't. Yeah. And it wasn't until I started really focusing on foundations of health, decreasing my stress, fixing my diet, getting good sleep, that I finally started to get some hormone balance and able to finally have a child of my own and carry a pregnancy all the way to term. Yeah, so it was rough. And then even after that, unfortunately, when we started trying for our second kid, I had a miscarriage that almost took my life.
Oh, gosh.
And and then during that period, no matter how much of the foundations of health I was doing, it just wasn't enough. And I ended up needing bioidentical hormone replacement therapy to get me back on track enough to have another child. And here I am, 20 weeks pregnant. So
right now?
right now.
Oh, so, congratulations. That's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah. Fingers crossed we make it all the way to the end, but right now it's looking pretty promising. So.
Oh my goodness. Well, we will keep that in our prayers for sure, because it feels like every pregnancy, every healthy kiddo is a miracle. But some of these stories, they feel a little extra miraculous. And the fact that, God put bioidentical hormones in your path, it's inspirational. And it also sounds like it was directional for you. So Tell me more about how you ended up being a naturopathic doc. And it sounds like bioidentical hormones were a natural segue based on your life experience. But how did we get here?
Yeah. So, when I was in undergrad, I always knew I wanted to be a doctor. But the more I learned about the profession and how it actually be like practicing out there, the more I felt like, for lack of a better term, I just kind of got this feeling that it'd be like working in a chop shop
Yep.
where I'm like, can't really treat people or heal people. And then naturopathic medicine honestly like fell into my lap. I mean, I had been working for a chiropractor, so I was like just as a secretary in undergrad. So I was already open to like functional medicine and like all those different avenues. And I hadn't heard about naturopathic medicine at the time, but then I heard about it and I was like, oh my gosh, this actually seems like you could really help people and not just, you know, be the person that's like pushing pills or surgeries. Not that I don't believe in those things and they aren't like miraculous, but they just seem like the only answer, the ending answer. So then I like went to naturopathic school and learned about all this other stuff. And, unfortunately, it's still very stressful. So it was not helping my hormones. And, I was married all through naturopathic school. And that's where the miscarriages started
Oh my
happening
gosh. Okay.
with the stress. It wasn't until I got out of school and, was working. And even though I was working, I was like less stressed than being in school. Yeah. And then eventually, after having the first kid and like been working in naturopathic medicine for a while, and then that's when bioidentical hormone replacement therapy came around. And I was like, this has been a game changer and I need to be offering this to more people because it changed my life. And yeah, that's kind of the summary of it.
I'm a little surprised. I guess, I don't know. Well, first of all, kudos to you for doing enough research to know that the direction that mainstream medicine was going. I just blindly went from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3 to phase 4. And, and like you said, it's not without merit. It's not without value. My family medicine residency is amazing. They put out amazing docs. The system that we're in, it's insurance first, second, and third. It's just so limiting. And then not knowing what goes into naturopathic training in detail, I'm a little surprised that it was later that you found out more about bioidentical hormones. And I guess one question I have, just as a physician, curious, in the process of trying to get pregnant and be healthy to carry to term, how did you do bioidentical hormones in a way that promoted ovulation and sort of that a healthy cycle that would then turn into implantation and a healthy baby? Like, how does that look? And is it too complicated to go into on a podcast? But it sounds awesome.
Yeah, I think I can do it. So first of all, because my hormones started messed up because of like the eating disorder and just basically having no hormones, but still having no hormones, first it suppressed the progesterone more than the estrogen.
Okay.
So even though I had low hormones, I still was in an estrogen dominant picture.
Right.
And so, you have to address the estrogen dominance. And part of that is bringing up the progesterone.
Yeah.
But for me, I also had to bring up my estrogen. So instead of doing bioidentical hormone replacement therapy for the estrogen, I use more of the natural approaches to not only bring up my estrogen, but also to help process it better, like move it through the body the way it's supposed to move through. And then I use bioidentical hormone replacement therapy to bring up the progesterone. And I was cycling it to get my cycle to regulate.
Right.
And then promote ovulation and all of those types of things because my hormones were just so low that I wasn't ovulating. Or if I was ovulating, it was like on a 3-month cycle or whatever it was deciding to do. But I find in general, when you're dealing with that issue, since you're estrogen, we live in that kind of a world that just promotes estrogen dominance. So I find a lot of times with fertility, it's easier to use the natural methods to deal with the estrogen, but progesterone is just kind of harder to get up there. And so that's why like the first time I was able to do it, but the second time I needed that bioidentical hormone replacement therapy because
And then,
Yeah.
probably did you need to be on progesterone throughout the pregnancy as well? I've seen that on some of my patients with miscarriages as well.
During the first pregnancy was tested, and because I'd had all the foundations in line, my progesterone was high enough. I didn't need it.
Yeah.
But this time when I needed it to regulate my cycles, I did need to stay on it through the pregnancy until the placenta took over that progesterone production. So
And that's miraculous. Yeah. At our practice, we meet about every patient the day before, the day of, and the day after. And then we open and or close that meeting with some prayer for prayer requests and to get us going for our day. And we will add you to the list for sure. 20 weeks, you said? So
yeah,
doing great.
just about.
We're almost to viability. Can I hear 36 to 40? Let's do it. Tell me
Yeah.
more about what you mean exactly by foundations of health. I think that's a term worth clarifying because most of my listeners will have no idea what we're talking about.
Yeah. So I have a definition for you. Foundations of health refer to core lifestyle, nutritional, and physiological principles that support our optimal function across all systems in the body and are central to overall well-being as they influence metabolism, energy, mood, sleep, reproductive health, and the body's ability to adapt to stress. So, of
Nice.
course, these things greatly impact our hormone balance as well.
Right on. Break that down for me. So when you say, okay, I had my foundations of health as kind of in order as I could,
Mhm.
in layman's terms, what does that mean to you at that time?
So the big ones are going to be healthy lifestyle choices. So regular movement, managing stress, getting good quality sleep. And then after that, it's going to be nutrition.
Yeah.
About getting the right nutrition. And I'm really big on whole food diets and, supporting our body through that. And then also you need to support your detox organs. So, specifically the liver, gut, bowels, if those aren't supported, then you're not going to be processing all the toxins in your body and they build up and cause other problems.
Right.
And then finally, due to the environment that we live in, unfortunately, avoiding toxins as much as possible. I say that with caution though, because if you go down the rabbit hole, it can really scare you.
That's
and
right.
There's only so much we can do in the world that we live in. But it's just acknowledging that we do live in a toxic world and trying to limit that as best we can. And one of the best ways to do that is to support those other foundations of health.
Right. If your liver, your kidneys, and your diet are as toxin free as possible, then you're at a good start, right? Just there's so much crud in so much of the food out there that would probably count as a toxin itself on top of just the environmental stuff that we're surrounded with all the time with the plastics and all the things. Okay. So, and we touch on that in, I do direct primary care. So we have time to dig in with our patients because I don't get too deep into all of that. I definitely need to learn more and be more specific on some of these categories that you're talking about. But when I find my patients that are hormone, they have all these symptoms of perimenopause, obviously menopause, family medicine trained guy who's learned as much of the outside the box stuff as I could. I tend to go to hormones pretty quick. Tell me more about, the foundations of health, I think that you referred to as ways to put off having to take hormones and supplements and that kind of thing to help this body do what it's supposed to do to heal itself. What's your approach when someone comes in with obvious sets of hormone symptoms, and you can maybe cover that a little bit, what that looks like, what you typically see in your patients, and then where do you start and kind of how do you phase in supplements and eventually bioidentical hormone replacement?
Yeah, I feel like the simplest answer is I want people to feel better as fast as possible.
Right.
So I do often go with hormone replacement therapy and working with them to set up those foundations of health.
Yeah.
That being said, it depends on what hormonal issue they're dealing with. If it's more of the things that affect younger women, like fertility, PCOS, estrogen dominance, PMS, those kinds of things, a lot of times I will start with the simpler things of setting good foundations of health. One of my biggest things is starting to clean up the diet and then moving into movement. And I will often give them supplements fairly early on with that to just kind of try to kickstart their body into processing their hormones better, supporting their hormones if they don't have enough, just kind of get those processes started. And then my hope is that eventually whether I start with supplements and then also end up adding the bioidentical hormone replacement therapy to it, is by setting up those foundations of health, I can at least taper them down on those or off them completely. That being said, that's the younger populace who have ovaries that should be working. When we get into perimenopause and menopause, of course, I give them hormones. Like, if you don't have hormones, you need hormones.
That's right.
But that doesn't mean you can't optimize the hormones, the bioidentical hormones that you're giving them by setting up these good foundations of health with them. But foundations of health take a long time. They do not happen overnight. If you tell someone like, all right, let's completely change your diet, stop stressing, and work out more, they're going to be like, no, I'm not doing all that right now. Or if they do it, they're going to do it for like a week or two, maybe a month, and then they're going to quit everything and never come back to you.
That's right. Well, and how do you stop stressing and work out more and totally change your diet? Like, that's stressful. You know, so
it's hugely stressful.
It's definitely a process. I'd love to hear more about diet. You know, I guess you could go anywhere with that. Let's go with estrogen dominant female. Could be, you know, young woman, middle age, perimenopause. What do you recommend? Are you just going like whole foods, or are you specifically avoiding certain food group? How do you approach that?
Okay. So first I like to say I individualize my diets to my patients.
Right.
Like, I don't think it's one size fits all. However, that being said, I have a few rules. One, standard American diet, not good for you.
Yep.
We need to cut out the high sugar, the ultra processed foods, ideally buy organic to decrease our toxin burden and just decrease things that drive inflammation, because if you have inflammation, it's going to eventually mess up your hormones as well as other things in your body.
Right.
So
Everything.
we got to get off the standard American diet. And secondly, with women, it is a huge issue with, you know, not only like eating disorders, but also just with all the wellness trends. You get a lot of fad diets.
Yeah.
You get things like intermittent fasting or fasting in general. And it's not that I'm opposed to fasting, but things like that often get disguised eating disorders. And then women aren't getting enough of their needed macros. Like, you need protein, you need fat, you need carbs. It's just about getting them in the right ratios. And that's going to be different depending on if they're working out, which they should be. But let's just go off like basic recommendations. Like, if someone is eating a standard American diet, what do I tell them when they first come in the door? So I say, cut out those ultra processed foods, try to cut back on the sugar. But usually I say, let's say like what we can add before we talk about what we're subtracting. So that's usually like, let's start tracking our fiber. Let's shoot for a goal of 35 grams of fiber a day. And if possible, I'd love you to be eating 30 different plants a week to support good microbiome diversity. Then
not going to happen. How do you feel about those capsules full of ground up vegetables and fruits? You know,
so when
plus or something.
So when I say 30 different, I also tell people herbs count. Like, if you are seasoning your food, that counts.
Nice.
Like, you don't need to be eating a salad with 30 different vegetables in it, but like every single, like if you make yourself tea, that counts too. That all contributes to the diversity. So, you know, it makes it a little bit simpler to have that conversation with them.
Yeah,
but
I love that.
35 grams of fiber, is the goal. And then we talk about how to get more plant diversity in our diet. But my big one is the fiber. And if you can't meet the fiber based off what you're eating, then I want you to supplement it.
Yep.
And slowly supplement it to get it in there. So, you know, trying to not be unreasonable with things, working with people where they're at and slowly increasing things over time. The other big one is I tell women often to do 30 grams of protein a meal or 90 grams of protein in a day.
Yeah.
Because women don't eat enough protein.
That's a decent amount of protein right there. That's pretty, that's for real.
Yeah. Well, very few people are meeting that goal. So that's usually the goal. And a lot of times people come back and they're like, well, I did 60. I'm like, great. That's a huge improvement.
Yeah.
Like, I'm happy with that. So celebrating the wins with diet is huge. And then lastly, I just tell them, like, you know, start incorporating healthy fats. I don't care which ones they are, but like, if you like avocado, eat avocado. If you are like olive oil, drizzle it on just about everything. Don't cook with it, but drizzle it on everything that sounds good. Eat fish. I prefer wild caught cold water fish because then you're going to get less mercury and less toxin exposure as well. And also then you get a higher content of those fats. So those are just kind of my general guidelines. And then finally, I say cut out any food intolerances. And when it comes to food intolerances, there's a couple ways you can figure it out. You can do the gold standard elimination diet. To be honest, no one ever wants to do that.
Right.
But some people have already figured out what they are. And so then just encouraging them to keep those removed. And then there's other tests to figure out if people really have no idea and you really think a food intolerance is a big underpinning to optimizing their health. There's a variety of different tests you can use to kind of figure that out.
Yeah.
That's where I start with diet.
Well, okay. So I think that's doable. I love that. I think one of the next big pillars might be stress and or sleep or some combination thereof. They tend to run hand in hand. High stress equals poor sleep and poor sleep equals high stress. Where do you sort of break into that circle of death there? And how do you advise that because stress is inevitable. What do I do about it?
Yeah. So first, you got to have the conversation of how interconnected stress is and the vicious cycle that all these different things create. So, mental stress, physical stress, they go hand in hand. But I also like to talk to people about if you're working on your diet, you are lowering your physical stress. You're improving your metabolic health, which is going to be less likely to then impact your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis because then you're decreasing your inflammation. So you're already working on it there just by starting to address your diet. So a little bit of positive reinforcement throughout, but also, talking about how much there is a feedback loop with all the different things we do and how that then increases our stress and then further worsens all hormonal dysregulation. So you have that conversation. And then, if people are doing movement, that's a great way to work on stress too. So then you get another layer of, okay, well, now we have two things that are already also foundations of health, but also working to decrease our stress. So movement and diet are a big piece of decreasing stress as well. So if that's all you can do right now, that's still a big step. But what I would love for people to do is to have a non-negotiable. And what I mean by that is you get to pick what it is because everyone's different and everyone de-stresses different. And ideally, I want you to do it daily. But if we start out doing it weekly, that's okay too. I am fine with either, but I want you to incorporate a non-negotiable into your life. Whether that is when I wake up in the morning, I take 10 minutes where I sit down and I just enjoy my cup of coffee or I enjoy my cup of tea, or I take a bath once a week where I just get to enjoy taking a bath and decompress. Or if you enjoy walking, going for a walk, any of those things. I know we're really big on talking about mindfulness and meditation, but honestly, I find most people aren't going to be huge on incorporating into their life right off the bat until you get a little bit more buy-in. So whatever makes them feel better, that's not scrolling on their phone through social media. Too many times people are oh, it helps me de-stress. I'm it doesn't.
Yeah. It helps me to go to sleep at night. It literally does not. Yeah.
Yeah. So as long as it doesn't involve being on your phone, I don't care what it is. Preferably no screens at all, but whatever makes you feel better, whether that's forgetting what you're stressing about for a few minutes a day or a few minutes a week, or if that's just actually making you feel decompressed by the time you're done with it.
Yep.
And so that's probably the biggest thing that I try to get people to incorporate into their lives to really address the stress factor.
What about sleep? I find that it's ubiquitous. Almost nobody sleeps well. Either they don't fall asleep well, they don't stay asleep well, they wake up exhausted. I like to try to address that by addressing the stress to some degree, but it's also, unless I get as good at that as you are right now, that, the stress is a little bit of a non-negotiable in and of itself. It's going to be present. I like adding in positive non-negotiables as well. How do you address sleep directly? Is it secondary? Can you address it primary? How do you do that?
Yeah. So I mean, going back a little bit to the non-negotiable, I always tell people you're going to have stress in your life, and there's good stress and bad stress. It's about dealing with chronic stress.
Yeah.
And part of that is sleep. And so sometimes, depending on who it is, the non-negotiable might be having a regular bedtime.
Yeah.
Or having a routine around bedtime. I do talk a lot about sleep hygiene with my patients. You know, I know people struggle with it. I am not above that.
Yeah.
I struggle with it too.
Yeah.
I am not the best sleeper. So it's something I too work on all the time. But yeah, addressing sleep. Sometimes I'll start off with like, if it's perimenopause and menopausal woman, you give them progesterone, they start sleeping better.
Yeah.
And I'm
Right.
like, great.
Yeah.
Let's do that. And that hugely impacts that whole stress cycle and all the other downstream effects of that. For younger women or other populations, I'm not above trying melatonin or things like Pharma-GABA, which is a really great Designs for Health product that helps just kind of chill you out. I'm not above using supplements to help people get tired, or if they wake up in the night, take something to help them go back to sleep, to just try to start getting better sleep. Once we have a habit built, whether that's using supplements or bioidentical hormone replacement therapy or what, then that's when I really start, and they feel better. That's when you really start getting more of the buy-in on working on the sleep hygiene.
Yeah. Right on. Agreed.
Yep.
I find it really, sleep hygiene is almost like insulting if you go to it first. I never thought of just closing my eyes and going to bed. Yeah, that never occurred. Your podcast that you run is called Hormone Heroines, right? So the hormonal play into, what stress does to hormones, what sleep does to hormones, what getting your hormones right does for stress and sleep. One thing that I found is, on the male side, especially in these weirdly young 30-something-year-old guys that we find in here, like miserable and low T, is that stress causes you to be low T, and then low T makes you less good at handling your stress, right? You're just completely adrenal dependent at that point. And it's this cycle that eventually just burns out and oftentimes in a blaze of glory. Like you said, foundations of health that we're going through here, it's primary, and then the hormones being a big part of how they end up feeling in the end, whether it's secondary or whether you have to start helping them out at the beginning. How do hormones and sleep play? I know progesterone is a cheat code in that estrogen dominant female, that perimenopausal menopausal female. How do you look at hormones and sleep? Because I think I could learn a little bit here for sure.
I think it really just goes back to regulating your hypothalamus.
Yeah.
Because it regulates all your other axes, whether that's the pituitary gonadal or the pituitary adrenal. And so if you're not getting good sleep, you're messing with that master clock that then can suppress or increase all those other downstream hormones, whether it's cortisol, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. Any of those things are going to be impacted if your hypothalamus, your circadian rhythm is messed up. So when it comes to estrogen dominance, that definitely disrupts your sleep because it affects that negative feedback, because it increases inflammation in the body, which then increases your cortisol and then feeds that feedback loop of your HPA axis that then tells you that you are further stressed and further suppresses those other things. And unfortunately, progesterone is the one that gets suppressed more than estrogen. And it just continues to be a big drain. So, progesterone is the cheat code. Like if you really want to help someone sleep better, that is often a cheat code to like get ahead of the game. Once they are ahead of the game and they're sleeping, that's when you can start backing things off and trying to just use the foundations of health. A lot of times I do come in very conventionally with, using the higher interventions to get people feeling better. And then when they feel better, that's when they can start doing the other things. So then hopefully get them off those things. I just kind of want to throw this back to like perimenopause and menopause. When we live our life under chronic stress and our adrenals are depleted, by the time we're hitting that phase in our life, that transition is going to be harder, not just because we're still under chronic stress and it's getting worse because we feel terrible, but also because your adrenals are supposed to be starting to produce some of that estrogen. It's supposed to be maintaining a little bit of those reserves for you. So you don't have this like, oh, my ovaries are done.
Yeah.
Like we're flatlining. That it's supposed to, like, your adrenals are supposed to be there to still give you a little bit in that transition. So if we live our whole lives under chronic stress, that transition is going to be even harder. And like, luckily for us, we had the cheat codes about hormone replacement therapy, but like, why not shoot for longevity when we're younger and start addressing stress sooner?
Oh, I love it. To open up, so, I'm talking to a naturopathic doc, so we have to talk about the gut a little bit, right? I mean, like that's a prerequisite, except that we're talking hormones at the same time. And I don't always tie, I guess, I could, MD stands for make a decision or make it up. Gut inflammation eventually is going to affect your hormones. But tell me about how you see sort of the gut hormone health connection and how that works.
Yeah. So this one might be a little long-winded, but let's go for it.
Let's do it.
So the gut plays a central role in hormone metabolism, circulation, and signaling far beyond just digestion. So one key player here is the gut microbiome,
Yeah.
and more specifically, a subset of bacteria, which we're coining a new phrase. You're seeing it more and more, called the estrobolome.
Oh.
So these microbes produce an enzyme called beta-glucuronidase, which helps regulate how much estrogen is resorbed into the bloodstream through a process known as enterohepatic circulation. But when the gut is not in balance, it affects those microbes and how much beta-glucuronidase you have available. It might increase, it might decrease.
Okay.
When that is off, then you're going to affect how much estrogen is absorbed back into the body. And if too much is absorbed back into the body, then you're getting your estrogen dominant stuff. You're getting like PCOS, irregular menstrual cycles, all those issues. But if too little is absorbed back into the body, then you're falling into the same thing. You're getting irregular menstrual cycles, or you're worsening perimenopause symptoms because your body is like processing more estrogen than it should be and further complicating those symptoms. So dysbiosis can hugely impact our estrogen metabolism and how much ends up back into the body just in that alone. But, estrogen isn't the only hormone affected. Like we've been talking about, the gut is deeply connected to the brain and the endocrine system via the gut-brain axis, which influences your hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis. And that system regulating your reproductive hormones like progesterone and testosterone and estrogen. So when you have that inflammation and it's spiking your HPA axis, it's suppressing your HPG axis. And then that further suppresses those hormones. And when those hormones are low, then you can start getting issues with your gut lining. It can become more inflamed. It can become more leaky. And also those hormones affect your microbiome, because the other fun fact about the estrobolome is as your estrogen decreases, your microbiome changes. So you start to have a completely different microbiome than when you had when you were younger. And that predisposes you towards that low estrogen, less estrogen getting put back into the body as well. So this can just directly impact hormone production and regulation throughout the entire body, and it changes throughout your life. And then lastly, of course, when we have all this pro-inflammatory state and your gut is inflamed, it's further impacting the HPA axis, and then cortisol also affects your digestion and can mess up your microbiome. So cortisol, it slows digestion. It's your stress hormone. It's not the rest and digest hormone. So if you're not digesting your food because your cortisol is high, you're not getting the nutrients you need. Also, that food's going to start basically like rotting in your digestive tract because it's not being digested and moved through it the way it's supposed to go. And then that's going to further aggravate the leaky gut, further disrupt your microbiome in general. And it just like stress, it becomes a whole feedback loop that also contributes to the stress feedback loop. And it's ultimately often suppresses hormone production on multiple layers as well.
Man, there was lots of cycles there, right? Like, so inflammation, first of all, I said inflammation, so that gives me a point. But secondly, inflammation causes this, which causes that, which causes more gut, which causes more inflammation, it's like, there were like 3 times where it was like, well, that causes the gut biome to be worse, which causes that to be worse, which causes the biome to be worse. So, start with the microbiome, or start with the leaky gut, or start somewhere and start breaking that cycle somewhere. It sounds like it would be incredibly fruitful for folks that are really suffering in that direction.
I mean, that's why I find when people first come in, I usually start treating the gut
Yeah.
before I start treating, like getting them to do the stress reduction, to be honest, because it's often easier to start there. And we start really small. Just like I said, we just try to increase the fiber. We just try to increase our protein. We just try to eat healthier things. And then as we get comfortable with that, we slowly phase out the inflammatory things and optimize our diet. It's a slow process, but it's hugely rewarding, and the benefits impact you throughout life, not only with hormone production, but also just your overall longevity, and will benefit your circadian rhythms as well.
I think that was a really good overview of sort of the foundations of health and how that's, cycling in with hormones and just wellness in general. Give me a cool or your favorite or a stereotypical patient story of someone who comes to you, because you're not the first doctor they've seen. Give me a good story of how this typically plays out.
I have two cases. You want like a fertility case or a PCOS case, or do you not care?
Oh, hey, dealer's choice. I love it.
Okay. All right. Well, since we kind of talked about my fertility story, it kind of covers a bit of that. Let's talk about the PCOS. So a lot of women either come in suspecting that they have PCOS or, already like having that diagnosis, and they feel like they are just defeated. Like they're like, well, I have this and this is the way it is.
Yeah.
And I'm never going to have a normal life because of it. So when you have that, honestly, the first thing I do is, test them, see where their hormones are at, just to get some baseline. Big thing I want to know is like, where's your testosterone? Where's your sex hormone binding globulin? And what are those levels at? I also want to know, are you in a severely estrogen dominant state as well? Because your progesterone is so low with the increased androgens. So I just like to get an idea of where are they? Like, how bad has this gotten? Once I get that, we got to get them feeling better. If they're not already on spironolactone and they have really high testosterone, I put them on that. If they're in the estrogen dominant situation and they have no progesterone, I put them on that. Honestly, I cannot tell you how beneficial progesterone is to PCOS patients.
Wow.
It is a game changer for them. I would say it's almost as comparable to like your perimenopause and menopause patients.
Wow.
When you put them on progesterone, they start feeling better. So we do those things right off the bat to get them feeling better. But PCOS is hugely a lifestyle thing because you also have all the metabolic dysregulation and the insulin resistance. So you have to work on diet. And so just like everything we talked about already, we start with those baby steps in diet. Often when you have that insulin resistance, most of the time I do find you have food intolerances that are further driving that inflammation. So getting those pulled out while working on diet is hugely important for that. Once you get diet under control, you'd be surprised how much your testosterone comes down and how much your estrogen starts to regulate.
Wow.
Once those things are coming down, then the stress comes down as well. During this time, I still keep them on the progesterone. A lot of times, like, we get off the spironolactone pretty soon after we fix the diet, but I do usually still keep them on the progesterone because they just feel so much better on it, and they really struggle at making it. That's not to say that I don't have a lot of natural tricks up my sleeve to try to increase progesterone naturally, but like we talked about, we live in a world that really promotes estrogen dominance, and a lot of my PCOS patients just end up staying on the progesterone. But I also will do things to try and increase their sex hormone binding globulin. Green tea is a huge part of that. It really increases it a lot. And that is a great way to absorb that extra testosterone that's floating around there without messing too much with your estrogen and progesterone, honestly. Like when I increase that, I don't see it affecting the other ones as much, but it does really seem to bind up the testosterone. So even if they have a high total testosterone, their free testosterone is within their normal limit, but their sex hormone binding usually increases. So the PCOS thing, that honestly with them, the biggest one is diet. And then after that, when they're feeling better, their stress comes down and they are able to start managing the other things. Everyone has the sleep problems, but that hasn't been like the biggest game changer. Of course, it's something I work on. The biggest thing with PCOS is the diet, because you have the insulin resistance piece, or like the predisposition towards insulin resistant and the metabolic dysregulation. So diet is probably the biggest foundation of health that I work on with my PCOS patients. And that's really the classic picture. And then, as far as bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, I'd say progesterone is pretty invaluable in treating PCOS.
The opportunity with PCOS females is that, with perimenopause, they've been suffering with it for a few years. And menopause, didn't start till they were 50-ish or whatever. But these PCOS women have been doing this for decades, potentially, by the time they get to you. Is there an age minimum for progesterone? I mean, do you do this in a 17-year-old? And if so, is it with the cycle or is it every night? How do you play with that?
Yeah, so definitely 20-year-olds, I will use progesterone.
Yes.
When they're that young and they're in their 20s, they often part of them also want to have babies, and fertility is a huge issue with PCOS. So they're in their 20s and they're also wanting to optimize fertility. I 100% bring on progesterone.
Yeah.
But if we're talking about a 17-year-old girl, a lot of times I do start with the foundations of health before we jump in, which can be really hard in teenagers because they're not super motivated to change their diet that much. So when it comes to teenagers, I do a little bit more of the supplementations because they are more willing to start there than they are necessarily to, stop eating the cookies at lunch.
I was going to say, it sounds like a good population to give them an easy win with some progesterone before bed. But yeah, you're right.
Yeah, no, I don't usually start it with them unless I'm really on the labs. I'm seeing a more advanced case. But I feel like the lucky part is if you do catch it that early, I don't typically see them, as far into the disease process as you see with older women. Because I really have seen a pattern where if you are seeing it early on in teens and 20s, it's usually not as severe as if you have someone that's 35 and coming to you who's had PCOS their whole life. There's a lot more hormonal dysregulation that's happened throughout that because just like everything else with life, if we haven't been taking care of ourselves and we've aged, we exacerbated these problems. So that's why I find with younger women, I don't need to jump to the progesterone right away in the teenage years. But if they're in their 20s and they're wanting to do fertility and move towards that phase of their life, then I will jump to it pretty quickly.
Well, gosh. Okay. So kind of wrapping it up a little bit, coming full circle. This is great. I know I've learned a ton and I appreciate it. I mean, this is stuff that I can use right away. For someone who's for a listener who's a little overwhelmed, not just because of all the information they got dumped, but just because of the way they feel. And it just seems like, oh my God, where would I even start? What are some of the, and maybe we're just going to repeat ourselves here a little bit, but how would you have them start? If someone's listening to this, and they feel, fatigued and their estrogen dominant symptoms or their hormones seem to be all over the place, or they're, 40-something female who's yes, that sounds like me. Where should they start? How would you have them approach this thing?
Look, a couple of things. One, find a good doctor. Find a good doctor who's going to be your cheerleader because it's hard.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to say it's not going to be hard, but you need someone that's going to, give you your options and help guide you. And also to help you celebrate the wins, because I feel like all too often we make these changes and we're like, oh, yeah, I did it. But we need to celebrate those. Those are huge accomplishments in our lives, and it is going to benefit us throughout life. So let's celebrate it. We should celebrate the little wins, and you should find a good doctor who can not only give you the good information and access to all these different types of treatments and options out there, but who's also going to basically be there to hold your hand a little bit as you make these changes, because they're not going to happen overnight. And you're going to need that cheerleader in your corner that's going to help you continue to make those changes, and also remind you from when you have made it a while and you're well, I still have these issues, but also remind you how far you've come.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's a huge aspect, that we often just we always try to fix things on our own. And, we don't try to learn everything on our own. Mentors are invaluable. And, you can think of your doctor as your mentor in this case. But so I feel like that should be, number one. But if you don't have access to a doctor, or you can't find someone who is going to be that for you, then honestly, I usually say, let's start with things that feel attainable, whether that's incorporating a little bit of movement into our life or starting to work on our diet, like baby steps. If you're going to do it on your own, baby steps, no matter like what these things are, just start with the one that feels like you can do it and stick to it. Start there and go slow.
I love it. If you're in the Texas area, I'd be happy to help you out. But, it's becoming more and more popular. Functional medicine is thankfully spreading. Direct primary care is growing. If you're now, what are you doing? Tell me, are y'all doing, your show's called Hormone Heroines, or you usually have your partner in crime up there. Are y'all doing telemedicine? Are y'all brick and mortar at this point? How are you doing that?
Yeah. So as far as these foundational hormonal complaints and really the hormone heroines aspect of everything that our podcast is trying to draw attention to, it's really a telemedicine business that we can treat people in Oregon and Washington at this point. We're hoping eventually to grow, but right now, if people want to reach out that are in Oregon and Washington, we're telemedicine based, so it doesn't matter where you live in Oregon and Washington.
Perfect. I love it. And then, so what about, how else can we get a hold of you? So if someone wants to get a hold of you and they want to either just get some advice, they want to establish with you virtually, follow your podcast, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah. So Hormone Heroines is going to be launching here hopefully in a month. So you'll be able to follow it on all your regular podcast channels, whether it's Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen. Other than that, if you want to get a hold of us right now, we have a website at blossoming.longevity.com. Our business is called Blossoming Longevity, and that's where we do all of our telemedicine out of. You can, go to our contact page on that website and reach out over that, or you can email us at info@blossominglongevity.com.
Love it. Blossom Longevity. It's beautiful. We'll have all of that in the show notes, so it'll just be a click away. And Serena, thank you so much. This has been awesome. I don't know what I'm going to title this episode, but it's probably going to be something to the effect of like hormones. And it's not just about your hormones or something, it's all about just, a healthy lifestyle. I wish it were simpler than that and that there were a cheat code, but it sounds like you just kind of gradually pursue health and wellness and longevity. And thank you so much for sharing with us. How do we get closer? And in my case, help my patients better. And, quite frankly, help me better. I love it. That was great.
It was great talking to you.
All right. Thanks a lot. We'll keep an eye out for your podcast to hit, and I can't wait. Talk to you later.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining me today on MyMD Unscripted. I hope today's conversation opened your mind and inspired you to imagine a better path for your health and therefore life. If you found value in this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone passionate about transforming healthcare. Real change starts with real conversations, so let's keep them going. Until next time, stay well, stay curious, and never stop pushing for better.